Number one.
And number one, the top story that we're going to lead off with is Iran and ISIS. Chuck Schumer, the next Harry Reid, leader of the Democrats in the Senate, is explaining himself and has now called on the Secretary of State to restart talks with Iran. Is that possible? Not according to the Secretary of State. Should it happen? Let's ask John Hanna, senior counselor of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And during the first term of President Bush, 43, he was the vice president's deputy national security advisor. John, should Chuck Schumer get his wish, and should we restart talks with Iran?
Hi, Brian. Listen, I think Senator Schumer is basically right. If, in fact, the United States Congress was to actually disapprove this deal, which I still think is unlikely that they're going to get the numbers they need to actually vote this deal down, it seems to me that that's what people should have expected is a possibility in the American democratic process, that the president should have taken that into account before he circumvented the Congress and went to the United Nations to get approval of this deal. But if, in fact, Congress says no, they're a co-equal branch of government, I think the president would be wise to go back to his allies and say, listen, we don't want to break this deal, but let's look at ways that we can improve it. The United States has done this over 200 times in its history when it's negotiated treaties and agreements with other countries that the Congress has said we'd like to see some changes, and the executive has gone back and done that. I don't see why this ought to be that different.
I don't know what they're basing this on, but the Secretary of State said, well, Iran hasn't really been working on their nuclear weapons program since 2003. That's a heck of a lot of centrifuges not to be working on a weapons program, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you'd have to define weapons program in the most narrow way to imagine that adding tens of thousands of centrifuges to your program, to building a heavy water, a nuclear reactor that's only capable of producing plutonium, and working on an intercontinental ballistic missile that can only deliver a payload to the United States, that's not actually working on a nuclear weapons program.
What do you like about this deal, if anything?
I think the only thing you can say, in the best of circumstances, if the Iranians don't cheat, we may be kicking the can down the road for about a decade, in which President Obama doesn't have to suffer the embarrassment that the Iranians have actually exploded a bomb in the desert and gotten a bomb on his watch. He'll be able to get out of Washington and leave this problem to his successor.
What kind of problems does it leave us with? I mean, on the surface, even though they might be saying things as if they'll go along, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, they do not seem pleased by it. How close are they to starting their own weapons program? And is it as easy as just wanting to acquire it?
No, I think these are programs that require a tremendous investment. But I think the Saudis are already well along down the line to putting forward. It's not like they have a shortage of money. They've got billions of dollars. They're developing their own nuclear research city dedicated to building some kind of program. They're acquiring reactors from South Korea and Russia. Those contracts are in place already. So I think the Saudis now, we're seeing them creating their own option, that if necessary, over the course of the next 10 years, they see where this is all headed, that if they need to get their own capability to match the Iranians, they're going to do that. And I think everybody ought to believe it.
Here's Secretary of State Kerry on Schumer's recommendation to start all over again. Cut 27.
Can you imagine trying to sanction them after persuading them to put in place sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table? And when they have not only come to the table, but they made a deal, we turn around and nix the deal and then tell them you're going to have to obey our rules on the sanctions anyway. That is a recipe very quickly, my friends, business people here, for the American dollar to cease to be the reserve currency of the world. But the notion that we can just sort of diss the deal, unilaterally walk away because Congress wants to, will have a profound negative impact on people's sense of American leadership and reliability.
John, it drives me crazy. I'm talking to John Hanner, Senior Counselor at Foundation for Democracy's work for the Middle East, focusing on the Middle East for President Bush during his first term and the vice president specifically. But it just bothers me that John Kerry's acting like he was put into a corner. He put our own country into a corner by entering into these talks and then eventually taking leadership on these talks. And now he says, well, now that they agreed to it, they're going to just go ahead and ignore the sanctions anyway. The UN has alleviated them from that stress. So what do you want us to do, America? You put us in that box.
Yeah, no, I think that is exactly the right point, Brian, that, in fact, this administration completely circumvented the American Congress, a co-equal branch of government making foreign policy, cut them out, said, wait, don't criticize the deal until you know what's in it. And then they go forward and do the deal and say, you can't criticize it now because we've already got the deal and we've already gone to the United Nations. And this tactic of repeatedly saying that the sky is falling if we have any concerns about this deal, that either we're going to go to war or the entire global order is going to abandon the dollar as the international reserve currency, and the American economy is going to come falling down. I think this is just an indication of the administration's desperation and their inability to actually talk about the merits or the lack of merits of this deal and the extraordinary risk they're running with American security and the security of all of our best allies in the Middle East.
I have a problem with Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, a front runner certainly when it comes to putting together a staff, putting together a team, and as well as money. When he said, the Iraq war, if we know now, we wouldn't have done it. That's impossible. No war has ever run like that. But he has had trouble explaining the Iraq war because it's been something no one's really talking about these days. But yesterday he went full bore into it. He went to the Reagan Library and slammed this administration and this former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, for leaving the job undone. Cut 25.
Where was the Secretary of State? Where was Secretary of State Clinton in all of this? Like the president himself, she had opposed the surge, then joined in claiming credit for its success, then stood by as that hard-won victory by American and Allied forces was thrown away. In all of her record-setting travels, she stopped by Iraq exactly once.
So he's taking her on Iraq. Is that a wise move?
Well, at Truth in Advertising, Brian, I've got to let your listeners know that I have done some advising for the Bush campaign on some foreign policy issues. I think, listen, to the extent that Secretary Clinton looks like she's going to be the likely Democratic nominee still, and to the extent that her great claim to fame about her tenure as Secretary of State is that she traveled the world more than anybody else, went to more countries than any of her predecessors. I think that going after her on Iraq, which is an issue that even this president that wanted to get out has now had to go back and send troops into harm's way again. The fact that she was America's top diplomat, visited the country once, was basically absent without leave on this portfolio and doing anything to try and keep our troops there and prevent the current situation that we're in with the rise of ISIS. I think it's fair game.
I agree. I think that he has to deal with it, too, because there are thousands of vets who lost their lives, American soldiers and airmen and Marines who lost their lives, and tens of thousands who have been wounded. I don't think it's right to say, well, that war was fought for no reason under false pretenses, because we all know what Saddam Hussein would have been doing now in the Middle East had he been not taken out by the country with the courage to do it. However, giving up the oil contracts to other countries like China and allowing Iran to gain influence, that was all done during the last 6 years. All done then. And I think it's an important dissemination to make. John Hanna, it's been great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.